Hello everybody, my name's Zahir and welcome to my channel Plants and Paints. Today we're going to be talking about the Philodendron Melanochrysum. Now I'm just going to show you the plants we're going to be talking about before I actually get started with the video. I've been running around so I'm a bit out of breath because we're just getting ready to actually go on holiday. We're heading out tomorrow, so it's all been a bit up in the air at the moment. So let's get started. Okay, the Philodendron Melanochrysum is a species of flowering plant from the Araceae family and is native to the rainforests of Colombia, but is widely cultivated as an ornamental plant, and I think for obvious reasons. It's such a beautiful plant to have in your collection. A very, very popular plant as well. I think my cat was just in the beginning of the video there, but he's gone walkabout now. Now, I just mentioned during the little introduction there that it is a flowering plant. Now, the flowers are so insignificant, and when it's flowering, it will actually slow its growth rate down. So if you do happen to have one and it does start flowering, the flowers are so insignificant that it's probably worthwhile you just remove the flowers from there, because you're barely ever going to see them anyway. And it just affects the growth rate of the plant, and most people who are buying this plant for their collection are buying it due to the foliage, because the foliage of this plant is absolutely amazing. So this can be one of the best plants to choose if you are looking for a large plant that will climb, and it will do great growing up things like moss poles or trellises, and it'd look absolutely stunning in an environment like a conservatory or growing up the side of your wall. I mean, this plant reaches humongous proportions, so it is going to be like a centerpiece plant if you decide to keep one in your collection. So the Philodendron Melanochrysum has beautiful heart-shaped leaves that typically grow to around 25 centimeters in length. I think this one here actually is around about 25 to 30 centimeters in length. Is quite a large leaf, but given the right conditions they can actually get significantly bigger than that. I mean, I quite recently went on a trip to Kew Gardens, and in there I saw some leaves that they must have been, you know, close to 50 centimeters in length. They were absolutely huge, but they were, you know, just amazing, beautiful plant. I actually went through quite a lot of difficulty sourcing these plants. I actually had to get them from abroad, and the plants that I'm showing you in the video are actually due to be shipped out tomorrow morning. So just before we leave to go on our holiday, these are going to actually be shipped to their new homes. Obviously I sell plants, that's a part of my hobby as well. So I import rare tropical plants and I sell them to people who find it difficult to source them here. So the leaves can grow to typically about 25 centimeters long, but as I mentioned, they can get significantly bigger given the right conditions. So the leaves are a dark green color with pale green veins in the leaves, and they've got a very velvety touch to them. They're actually really nice. I can't express how much I actually love these plants. I was so tempted to keep one for myself, but my supplier has promised me that, you know, he is going to keep one large one aside for me for when my next shipment actually comes in, so that I can have a significant one for myself as well. So unfortunately for now, I did start with 10 of these, and all 10 of them are now sold, and they're going to be shipped out to their new homes over the next few days, along with a whole host of other plants. So yeah, heart-shaped leaves with dark green color and a pale green veining with a velvety texture to them. So because this is a climbing plant, it will require to be fixed to a moss pole or something to allow it to grow up. Otherwise the weight of the plant will make, the weight of the leaves will make the plant droop over. Now I'll show you this as an example. I hope that we're getting that in the video, but this plant here, as you can see, the leaves are drooping over, but if I had that connected to some kind of support, it would be more upright and it will grow in a straight pattern. If it was to be left like this, then it would actually grow in the direction that it's facing, because the new leaf, I don't know if I'll be able to show it to you, but the new leaf is emerging from here, so that's going to come out in a straight line. So obviously when growing these, you do want to offer them some kind of support that they can grow in the upward fashion that they naturally would grow. I mean, in the tropical rainforest of Colombia, you would find these wrapped around trees with their leaves just cascading down the tree. And you know, I've seen pictures of them in the wild and they look absolutely amazing, but you do have to provide them with the right growing conditions. Otherwise you are going to end up with a plant that, instead of going vertical, is going to end up going along. So it's a highly sought after variety of philodendron, and they're generally quite easy to grow. So if you're looking to add one to your collection, apart from the quite expensive price that they fetch, you generally have nothing to really worry about, because they are relatively easy to keep, and you know, their care and maintenance requirements are quite minimal. So you know, even though they are an expensive plant, and I can't imagine a beginner starting out with some of this, they generally are okay for every level of plant keeper, providing you get a few of the fundamentals right, which I'll go over a little bit when I start talking about the care and maintenance requirements of the plant. Then generally you should be able to keep this no matter what level of plant keeping you're at. So I think I've given a general introduction into the plant there, and if I've missed anything that you think is quite important, or some information that you want to know, then please don't hesitate to ask me. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go onto a little introduction into the plant care before we start talking about things like lighting and humidity and potting mix and so on and so forth. So a little introduction into the plant care. So the Philodendron Melanochrysum is an easy to grow plant that will require very little care and maintenance. Whether grown indoors or outdoors, this plant will thrive in a moist soil environment, but try to use soil with high levels of organic matter. So you want to include things like worm castings or coffee grounds into the potting mix of this plant on irregular intervals, not regular intervals, because you don't want to put too much nutrient in there, because they do have quite sensitive roots. So you do want potting mix with high level of organic matter. Make sure to give the plant something to cling to whilst it's growing. Otherwise, as I mentioned, you're going to end up in a situation where your plant is drooped over, and you know, pulling a plant back up into its normal position can be quite stressful for the plant, and also you can quite easily end up breaking it as well. I mean, you can see from the stems here, other than from where the leaf is actually growing itself, they're very rigid. So this is something that you want to address very early in the plant growth itself. So what also you want to do is ensure that you're growing your plant, when growing it indoors, you want to ensure that the temperature ranges are ranging from anywhere between 12 up to 27 degrees Celsius. They are the ideal growing temperatures for this plant. The temperature may seem quite low, but this plant depends more on humidity. So as long as you keep it within the range of 13 to 27, 13 going down to the minimum temperature that you're gonna get to at night time, and then 27, even bordering up to 28, then you're going to get optimal growth out of this plant. Although saying that, it can go up in range in temperature up to, you know, the late 20s, so 28, 29, even up to 30 degrees, but you don't want to leave it in that for prolonged periods of time. Also, as far as lighting is concerned, this plant likes to be in bright indirect light, although it will tolerate low light levels. Now that doesn't mean go and stick it in your passage where you've got no windows or anything like that. That just means you can keep it in a room where it's not receiving a huge amount of light, but it is getting a certain amount of light. All plants need light to be able to photosynthesize. Now there are pluses and minuses to this. So basically, if you've got the correct lighting environment where, for instance, you've got it in bright indirect light, it will grow larger leaves, and the gaps between the internodes between those leaves will be shorter, so you'll end up with a very lush looking plant. Where if you leave it in a low light environment, it's still going to grow, it's still going to do well, and it will almost thrive as well as it does in high lighting conditions, but the gaps between the internodes will stretch, and also the size of the leaves will diminish quite significantly. So where this plant here has up to, I would suggest, 30 centimeter leaves, if you were to put this in a low lighting condition, then any leaves it produces from there on will end up being significantly smaller and smaller and smaller, and you'll end up with, leaves that end up being 10 to 15 centimeters in length, where you initially started with a plant that's producing 30 centimeter leaves. So depending on what you want out of the plant, I mean, myself, I would always want the plant to look lush, and I would want the leaves to be as big as possible. So therefore I would give it bright indirect lighting conditions, just to make sure that it maintains a normal growth pattern, if you like. Due to the nature of the growth of this plant, and because it will droop over, you can actually put this plant in hanging baskets as well and have it cascading over the side of the hanging baskets. I think that would look equally as beautiful as if you had it growing up a moss pole or attached to the side of a wall, growing up the side of a wall in your home. Those are two different ways that you can pot this plant, and if you chose to put it in a hanging basket, then obviously you wouldn't have to worry about securing it, because you want it to cascade, you want it to move in the breeze and so on and so forth. So there are two different methods of potting for you. So I've given you a general introduction into the plant care. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start talking about the specifics. So firstly, I'm going to talk about lighting. Although I have mentioned a little bit about the lighting, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about that now. So although this plant will grow in low lighting conditions, it will do best in a medium to bright indirect light. So no direct sunlight for this plant, so don't go putting it in a south facing window or anything like that, because the leaves, they're very delicate. I mean, as you can see from me just touching the leaves, they're very thin, and they're very flimsy leaves, and you can imagine the sun actually piercing through the leaves and ending up burning them and causing significant damage, which in turn could end up killing your plant. So keep them in a shaded location which will still receive good indirect sunlight. So for instance, if you can see my window behind me, I have a north facing window, and I keep the melanochrysums on this side, just on the outside here. So my light travels in this direction, so they're pretty much always in the shade, but they're in such a place where they're getting significant indirect but bright light throughout the day. So for optimal growing conditions as well, you also want to make sure that, if you want the leaves to be big and you want the internodes to be not widely spaced between each other, then that lighting is quite essential. And equally, like I mentioned, if you're not too fussed, because I've seen pictures of people with melanochrysums, just as an example, on Instagram, where they've got quite large gaps between their internodes and their leaves are significantly smaller than what you're actually seeing on either of these two plants, and they do look really beautiful as well. It's down to your personal preference. So if you want them to be smaller leaves, but you want a plant that will trail along something, and you don't have the space to have a 30 centimeter leaf hanging down in that required area, then you can put it in a lower lighting condition. So the more light, the more lush; the less light, the less lush, and the more gap between the internodes you're going to get. Okay, so I've pretty much covered lighting there, so I think we're going to move on to potting mix now. So the Philodendron Melanochrysum enjoys a well-draining but moist, rich organic potting mix. So ideally, I would suggest to use a mix such as orchid bark potting mix, a good quality nutrient-rich potting soil that is very well draining, and perlite. Now I actually use that in the potting mix that I've put these in, and they seem to be doing very well. I've had them for a few weeks now. I thought before I actually put them up for sale, I would give them time to recover from their long shipping haul. So like I said, I've had them for about 3 weeks. They seem to be doing really well. This one's actually starting to produce a new leaf, where it's got the markings on the stem of a new leaf that is being produced. So I would imagine therefore that they are actually really happy. Also, stay away from wet, mucky soils and sandy soils for this plant. So you don't want coarse grit in there, because it's going to end up damaging the rooting system, and also it will dry out too quickly because you need to keep it quite evenly moist. And also a wet or mucky potting mix is going to be quite thick, and it's going to be not very easy for it to drain excess water out of it. So you want to stay away from either of those two where this plant is concerned. So potting mix, as I mentioned, just use orchid bark potting mix mixed with perlite and a good well draining potting soil that is rich in nutrients, so high in organic matter. I've covered everything there as far as the potting mix goes, so we're going to talk now a little bit about watering. So I think this rule generally goes with all of the types of plants I keep, because I keep the kind of plants that generally you're going to find in tropical rainforest environments. So you are going to hear me saying this again and again in my videos, but with this type of plant you want to be using room temperature filtered or rainwater. So I use filtered water for all of my plants. I don't really have an opportunity to collect rainwater, because the only place I can collect the rainwater from where I live is it dripping off other balconies, and I don't like the idea of what kind of contaminants that will carry, so I generally will filter my water. And what I will do is I will filter my water 24 hours before I'm due to use it, so that I can leave it standing, so that any contaminants in the water that the filter hasn't managed to take out that can evaporate naturally are given the opportunity to do that. So use filtered or rainwater at room temperature. And what you want to do with watering is you want to keep the soil evenly moist. So you don't want to leave the soil soggy or waterlogged. What you want is you want to actually make sure that any runoff water is taken away, so that it's not sitting in there, because the longer you leave it actually sitting in excess water, the soil will actually start sucking that water back up into the soil itself. So what you want to do, you just want to give it a good watering around until you start seeing it running out from the bottom. Leave it stand for a couple of minutes and then get rid of any excess water, and that should be significant in between waterings. And just keep an eye to make sure that you're keeping it evenly moist. You can use things like a moisture gauge in your potting mix if you're not sure how evenly moist it is. But generally what I will do, I'll use my finger, I'll stick it down almost the entire length of my finger to see where that moisture's at. I don't mind if the top layer's gone a bit dry, because generally where it's sitting, the sun is going to dry that top layer out significantly quicker than the rest of the potting mix. And when I potted it, my roots are actually about at this level in the pot, so I want to make sure that it's evenly moist from just below the top through the rest of the actual potting mix. So making sure that you're doing that will stop things like root rot happening, and it will keep your plant happy and healthy. So, you know, to avoid killing your plant, make sure that you're following those parameters as far as watering is concerned. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about humidity now. Now, misting your Philodendron Melanochrysum is very beneficial to the plant. This is a plant that absolutely loves humidity, as you can imagine, coming from a rainforest environment, and it's, you know, deep under a canopy because it's usually wrapped around tree trunks and things like that. It's in a very high humid environment, therefore, so you want to keep the humidity as high as possible. So misting this a couple of times a day isn't going to do any harm to the plant. In fact, it will benefit from it hugely. Other things you can do to raise the humidity is you can use a humidifier. Now, my melanochrysums, I don't know if you can actually see it in the video, but I've got a humidifier just there, and my melanochrysums are sitting, you know, a foot away from that humidifier, so they're in an average of 75, even up to 80 degrees, 80%, sorry, 80% humidity any given time throughout the day or evening. Because my humidifier runs 24 hours a day. Other things you can do to raise your humidity around the plant, if you don't have a humidifier, that is you can put a tray down, and you can lay pebbles on that tray, and you can half fill that tray with water and then put the plant pots on top of the pebbles, and the water will evaporate, and that will naturally create a humid environment around the plant. The other thing that you can do, and I do this with all my humidity loving plants, is you can group them together. As you can see on my table here, I've got a lot of my humidity loving plants all grouped together. Even though they're in high humidity, I like to keep them as close together as possible so that that humidity is consistent, so that, you know, there's not, you know, ups and downs within that humidity. I try to keep it as fluent as possible. Other things you can do is you can get like the shells that you get at the beach, and you can put those on the top of the potting mix, and then when you're watering the plant, they will collect little reservoirs of water, and that will also evaporate, and you can just top them up as and when needed. I don't think the water in those is going to last more than a couple of days, but all of these little things, they help to creating the right kind of humid environment around the plant. Other things you can do, you can put bottles of water around the plants, especially where you've got the plants grouped up, because you'll find that water evaporates quite quickly in grouped up situations. So adding water around to help maintain that humid environment is very, very, very beneficial to the plant. Okay, so we've talked about humidity there. I think I've pretty much covered everything. We're going to talk lastly about fertilizer. Sorry if I seem like I've rushed my video today, but literally I've got to go to work in the morning. I'm working until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then straight after work I've got to drive to Scotland, which is like a 10-hour drive for me, because we've got to drive all the way up into the Highlands, and I'm in London, and, you know, we're hoping to get there the same evening. So I've got a million things to do here, and, you know, I then have to go off on that journey tomorrow. So this is the only opportunity I've got to make this video. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about fertilizer now. So with this plant, you need to use a very good quality fertilizer, one that breaks down very well, as the roots of this plant can be very sensitive. So you don't want things like build-ups of heavy salts within the potting medium, because that in turn is going to end up damaging the root system on your plant, and in turn that's going to end up killing your plant. So you want to make sure that you use a good slow release fertilizer. You can get fertilizer sticks that are slow release. I would even suggest that they're ideal. Otherwise, just make sure that you get a good quality fertilizer that, you know, breaks down very, very well in water. Maybe do some research and find out which are the best fertilizers that don't leave behind traces of salt buildup. in your potting mix afterwards. What you want to do is you want to fertilize this plant around every 2 months, and you want to fertilize it at around 50% dilution rate of what the fertilizer is suggesting. Now, the reason I'm saying 50%, generally a lot of my plants I'll do at 20-25%, but the reason I'm saying 50 is because the growth pattern of this plant is, you know, it grows such big significant leaves that it does require an amount of nutrient. So you can't, you know, rest at the lower end of that scale. You have to sort of meet it in the middle. So 50% dilution rate should be fine, but providing you're doing it once every 2 months. And you know, when fertilizing, the same thing applies with the water. When you've got runoff, make sure you remove that runoff, because that's going to contain any extra nutrient that hasn't sat in the actual potting mix itself. And if you leave that at the bottom, it's going to build up salts, and eventually when your roots start moving to the bottom, they're going to get clogged up, they're going to get burned, and in return it's going to end up, you know, killing your plant off for you. So try to make sure that you're sticking to those parameters of about 50% dilution rate once every 2 months. Now, also during the winter period, what you want to do is you want to cut the watering back, and you want to cut the fertilizer dilution rate back as well. You want to cut the fertilization dilution rate down to about 25%, and you also want to cut that from 2 months to every 3 months. And you want to cut the watering back. I think naturally you should be able to tell that the plant is drinking less water, because during the summer months, you know, evaporation will take up some of the moisture that's in the pot, so you'll find yourself watering them more frequently, and also the plant will drink more because it's hotter, so it's feeling thirstier. Where in the winter it's not going to drink so much. So I think I've covered pretty much everything about the plant now. I hope you've enjoyed my video today. If you have, please don't forget to leave a comment in the comment box. If you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you can receive notifications of future content I'm due to release. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I look forward to making my next video for you. I'm actually going to try and find some sort of garden centre or something whilst I'm up in Scotland and buy a plant, and actually try and do a video in the place that we've rented, just so that I can add another video to my collection during this coming week. So like I said, thank you for everyone for tuning in. The reason I did this video today was again due to my votes on Instagram. I put up a vote every week generally to ask people what plants they want to learn about, and this week I put 4 options up, and one of the options was actually for me to choose a plant myself, and that option actually won. So hence I chose the Philodendron Melanochrysum. The reason I chose them is because they're not going to be in my collection from tomorrow, because they're actually going to go off to their new home. So good luck to the plants, you know, and good luck to the new owners. I'm sure you're going to love your plants. I'm quite sure you're going to be watching this video as well. So you get a nice little feature for your plant there. It's becoming famous, and I look forward to making next week's video for you. My name's Zahir. This is Plants and Paints, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.